It's a great story, and since it's the first Sunday of Advent, and we're 4 weeks out from Christmas, now is the time to ask all the questions that you don't want to ask. Now's the time to talk about the things that we don't like to talk about. Actually, to be fair, it's been a while since it was actually a scary thing to question the virgin birth. Sorry, I'm listening for a sharp intake of breath. I don't know if you remember back in the late 1990s, the then moderator, Bill Phipps, did that very thing and questioned whether or not he believed in the divinity of Jesus. And it made a national headline in the Globe and Mail. To be fair, haven't really liked the United Church very much anyway, but still, he asked that question. Lots of people have asked that question about the virgin birth and doubted whether that's a real part of the story. There are reasons, and I think to ask the question, do you believe in the virgin birth, isn't a fair question to ask, because there is no yes or no answer to that. There's only yes or no with explanation. And that's one of the great things about Advent, by the way, is we have this time to ponder these very things, to wonder about these pieces of the story. And here's a huge piece of the story to wonder about. So both Matthew and Luke refer to the Virgin Mary and the virgin birth. To be fair, Jesus' origin story is only in 2 of the 4 Gospels, right? And the most complete one, the one that we're most familiar with at Christmas time, is the one from Luke. But what we tend to do is actually conflate the 2 stories together, right? So we can tell the story about Gabriel and Mary, and we can tell the story about Gabriel and Joseph, we can tell the story about the journey to Bethlehem, we can tell the story about Bethlehem, and we can tell the story about the Magi as all one big thing. That's why we create it's not there yet. That's why we create our manger scene, our creche at Christmas with all of the characters, right? Because that's all of the characters in the story that comes from 2 separate accounts. It's also worth noting, by the way, that generally, I think it's fair to say most biblical scholars will tell you that of the Gospels included in the Bible, Mark was first, likely to be first. And they say that in part because Matthew and Luke include stories that were in Mark. Matthew and Luke also include stories, though, that come from a different source, which is called Q. I know this is starting to sound like a Bible study. Stick with me. And so there's another source. And then they have their own individual details, right? And then John is that one that comes much later. It's a bit of an outlier. It's a little bit more mystical and stuff. But the 3 synoptic Gospels are connected. And the order in which we usually describe them as having occurred or been written down are Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Mark famously begins with, this is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Here's John the Baptist introducing Jesus. Here's Jesus as an adult. Boom, we're off into ministry. There's no origin story. This is where I got in trouble earlier this week, I have to say, when I said to a colleague, this is the point at which Jesus is like Wolverine. Right? Now, if you're a superhero fan, you know what I'm talking about. What usually happens in superhero stories, comic books, whatever, what usually happens is we're introduced to a character, the superhero character, as an adult. We might get a few details about his childhood or a birth story, something like just a couple of details. But what we learn about them as a child or prior to when they first appear usually happens as a throwback or a flashback when we need to explain why they're the way they are. Right? And then, about 5 movies in, they decide to do an origin story movie, which tells you where they come from and about their childhood and their growing up and all that stuff. In other words, we've met the character as an adult. We've seen what they do and what they can do, and then we find out where they came from. Now that you already know them, this is their background. I wonder if that isn't actually what has happened here. We're introduced to Jesus in ministry. We're introduced to Jesus by John the Baptist, and then his ministry and work as an adult. And then somebody went, where did that guy come from? Somebody, of course, famously said Nazareth, and nothing good comes from Nazareth. But somebody had to tell the story of Jesus' birth. And it's a fantastic story, because it turns out, and you'll appreciate this because you've already met the adult Jesus, it turns out that Jesus' birth narrative includes two famous prophecies being fulfilled about the Messiah. One of which is, a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us, from Isaiah. So both Matthew and Luke have Jesus' birth fulfilling that prophecy. There's also a prophecy that says that Bethlehem will be where the Messiah is born. That's from Micah. That is also included in the birth story. Is it starting to sound a little bit suspicious that all of those things happened as they should have? Don't be so cynical. The thing is, we love this story about the birth of Jesus because we collect all of those characters into that one lovely pastoral manger scene. You know, after that lovely pastoral moment when the angels have visited the shepherds and told them what's going on. You know, that comes after that lovely trip to Bethlehem that was so lovely on the back of a donkey. She probably walked. Which comes after that lovely moment where the angel Gabriel visits Mary and tells her what's happening. And Mary, of course, accepts everything without question. It's lovely. And then we start to ask questions. And we start to ask questions like, okay, virgin birth. How does that work exactly? Because we have science now, and that's not how it works. We're all pretty sure of that, right? It's not how it works. So, yeah, no. Thank you very much. That's the thing you're going to focus on. And not the fact that that message came from an angel. We're not going to question angels, but we're going to question the impossibility of the message they brought. So there's all sorts of questions like that we can ask about the story around Christmas, which, by the way, it doesn't even start here. We didn't really start in the right place, did we? It starts with the angel, who is unnamed, who visits Zechariah and says, you're going to have a son. And Zechariah and Elizabeth, very much as a counterpoint to the virgin birth, are way too old to have children. And so Zechariah doesn't believe the angel. And so the angel says, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And just to prove it to you, you will not be able to talk again until the child is born. And so he can't talk. And sure enough, Elizabeth gets pregnant, and she has a son. And they name him John. In the middle of that story, Mary goes to visit Elizabeth, because they're cousins. And there's that lovely moment where the child leaps with joy in her womb because the child recognizes that Mary is carrying Jesus. And then the story moves on from there. And there's more angels, by the way. There's more angels yet to come. We don't seem to question the improbability or impossibility of angels, but we have an issue around the virgin birth because that's real to us. It's real. We can definitively say, no, that's not how it works. But don't you think that's the point, though? Is that isn't how it works. It's that moment of which, as the angel explains quite rightly, nothing is impossible with God. kind of the point of the story. Plus, bonus, it fulfills a prophecy. An angel appears. We're okay with that. But we have trouble with this moment of realism. Why don't you have questions about angels? Is it just because they're everywhere in the Bible? Is it just because we think that's how God communicates? As we heard in that translation, spirit messenger. And we can come up with different ways of explaining how we experience angels too, can't we? And we use that terminology in different ways, right? In fact, currently, this is the month of Angels Among Us in Basha, because the idea is that we are all angels, can be angels to each other, right? God is present in all of us, so we can be angels to each other. Sometimes we have experiences where something happens and we feel like there's a presence there or something that helps us. That's an angel. Somehow something miraculous happens that saves us in a moment that is life-threatening. We can't explain it. It was an angel. All of those moments we can't explain, those experiences we can't really define particularly clearly, they were angels. And we have trouble with this moment of realism. Why is that? I wonder if our experience of how we connect with God, our experience of angels, our understanding of that, helps us understand the impossible. It was a miracle. Well, miracles happen. In fact, miracles happen so often we should probably stop calling them miracles, because they happen. An angel visits Mary. And by the way, we have not a whole lot of detail here, do we? We get words like she was perplexed or troubled that the angel appeared. If an angel were to appear to you suddenly, in the manner in which it's described in this story, would you be troubled or perplexed? I can think of other expressions I'd use. But troubled and perplexed would be the tip of the iceberg. It'd be a who you gonna call moment. She's troubled and perplexed. So the angel has a message, and the message begins with, famously, the words we most love to hear from Jesus: don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You found favor with God. You're going to have a son. It's going to be Jesus. Now, bearing in mind that she was only troubled and perplexed at the appearance of an angel, how do you think Mary would react to you're about to be pregnant? And it's not in the story, but there are assumptions. There are details that we add because we feel we have enough awareness or understanding of the culture of the first century that we say things like, in all likelihood, Mary would have been somewhere in the 13 to 15, 16-year-old range. And, of course, but at that point, she would have already been promised to someone. That's why she's already, maybe not engaged, but promised to Joseph. In some accounts, we say she's already married to Joseph. So there is already a relationship there. How do you think she's reacting to that news? It could be that she's already settled into the feeling that, I'm talking to an angel anyway, so I guess, anything can happen now. Or again, this might be a moment where the angel wants to say, don't be afraid. It's going to work out. It's going to be fine. And again, here we are, and of course, it's important to focus on Mary becomes pregnant. She's going to have a baby. It's going to be Jesus. Now she's going to have to deal with Joseph somehow. And this is another moment where we kind of put our stories together and everything, right? Because an angel goes and talks to Joseph as well. That's Sorry, spoiler alert, that's next week. But just imagine, though, how this story would go if there wasn't an angel in it. I believe God has told me I'm going to have a child. Oh, look, I'm going to have a child. Explain that to Joseph. Joseph, how are you going to receive that news without the appearance of an angel? Some other shepherd walks up to the shepherds in the middle of the night in a field and goes, "Hey, you know what? There's a kid being born in Bethlehem." Angels have power in this story. They are the movers of the story. Without this story, without angels, there is no story. They're the ones who are making all of this happen. From the very moment of Zechariah seeing the first angel to say, "You're going to have a son, and his name's going to be John," and he's going to be the one who introduces Jesus, and then Mary and Joseph, the shepherds, you bet there was angels at the manger too. And remember later on, again, spoiler alert if you don't already know the story, but the Magi, once they visited Mary and Joseph and Jesus, an angel tells them to go home another way to save them from Herod. There are angels in this story. All the way through the story, they are the ones who move the story along. They are the ones that make things happen. That's not fair. They're the ones who initiate it. If we didn't participate in the story, there'd be no story either. I think that's one of the coolest things about the Christmas story. It's the relationships between how the angels move the story along and how the people in the story participate in that. Why? Because they heard the message and they believed. They heard the message from God and believed. And the most important part of that message, I think, that they heard was, don't be afraid. God is with you. Whatever's going to happen next, and the story is full of unexpected, isn't it? Nobody in this story expected any of the things that are going to happen. But they were open to the things happening. They were willing to step into them and embrace them, engage them, and go forward. Why? I think it's because an angel said, don't be afraid. God is with you. Jesus will echo that frequently in his ministry. Don't be afraid. God is with you. And I don't think there's any difference between how Jesus is saying it and how the angels are saying it in this story. Not for a moment do I think the angel is saying, just stop being afraid right now. Flick a switch. Don't be afraid. You're going to be fine. It's all good. I don't think Mary was any less anxious about what was going to happen next, especially when she has to talk to Joseph. When this moment with the angel was done, than she was when she first heard the news. But I do think she knew how to handle that. God is with me. That's the difference. I don't think for a moment God, whether it's through angels or Jesus or anyone else, doesn't think we're capable of being afraid, because we are. I also think we're not capable of suddenly turning that off. What we are capable of is addressing it and engaging it by understanding that God is with us. Wherever we're stepping next, wherever we're going next, whatever might happen next, God is with us. There are angels around us everywhere. The thing about that, for me too, isn't just that it stops there. It's not just a question of, don't be afraid, God is with you, go on ahead. It's a question of, what's your vision for going ahead? If your vision for going ahead is you have expectations that must be met, we got a little bit of an issue there. And sometimes that's how we do come to Christmas, right? We call it the season, Advent is the season of expectation, the season of anticipation. And sometimes what we mean really by expectation is the fruit bread is going to be better than last year. These are the gifts I'm going to get. This party is going to be excellent. When the family comes together, everyone will be there. We have expectations. This house will have the best decorations. And ours does, by the way. Yeah. We're in a competition with the Wilsons, and theirs are not as good this year. I'm sorry. We have expectations that we want them to be met. We've already decided this is how it's going to go. How do you think this story is going to go forward if Mary were to go, well, this is how Joseph is going to receive this, oh well, and headed off somewhere else? How do you think this story is going to go if the angel visits, spoiler alert on next week again, the angel visits Joseph and Joseph goes, okay, I hear you, but yeah, I'm still going to ditch her. Because I've already decided how this is going to go when people find out. How are we supposed to envision going forward? How are we supposed to vision the future, the possibilities, the opportunities, if we've already decided? So it's not just a question of don't be afraid right now because God is with you. Don't be afraid to step forward. Don't be afraid to take opportunities. Don't be afraid to step into challenges. Don't be afraid to envision what might seem impossible right now, because God is with you. You too are favored just because we are. Don't be afraid.